Madam Chair, we are now live.
All right, thank you, and welcome to this afternoon's FGO meeting on November 22nd, 2021. I will call this meeting to order. This is the Finance and Government Operations Committee of the City Council, and we're missing two of our counselors, but expecting them shortly, and we are all going to be present today via Zoom. It's a remote or online meeting where all participants will be on a video or audio conference, and we appreciate your patience as FGO meetings are conducted this way. Written comments were received for today's meeting and were provided to members of the committee, and members of the public have had the opportunity to address the committee if they are signed up for live public comment per the rules published on the agenda and on our website Friday. Members of the staff, city staff, public, and the media have the ability to view this meeting live through the YouTube and Zoom webinar. The live stream can be accessed from most smartphones, tablets, or computers. And for those watching on the live stream, thank you for joining us. We are going to go ahead and start with public comment. Mr. Moya, we have some people present, correct?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, so to begin, hello to those of you joining us to provide public comment. If you're watching the YouTube live feed for this meeting, please mute or turn it off at this time. And here's some of the public comment ground rules. Comments are to be addressed to the committee members only. Each participant has 1.5 minutes to present, and any disruptive conduct will result in removal from the Zoom meeting room. There will be 1.5 minute time limit, and the timer will start once you begin speaking. Then the Zoom moderator, Mr. Moya, will let you know when your time is up. Mr. Moya, if you'll please call the name of the first speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first speaker is Barbara Baca. Baca, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Okay, hi, I'm Barbara Baca, and first I'd like to thank the council for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you about an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and that is the Open Space Program, the Open Space Trust Fund, and Advisory Board. I started my career in 1983 with the Open Space Program, and 30 years or so later, I retired as the Parks and Recreation Director. But what I have seen in the growth and success of the Open Space Program is that one thing holds true, and that is the trust that the community has of this council, of the city government to continue this very successful program. And a cornerstone of that is the Open Space Trust Fund. So what I would like to say is back in 1982, when it was created, my father, Patrick J. Baca, was the president of the city council. I knew his colleagues and the Open Space Advisory Board at that time. And it was a very deliberative process that put this trust fund together. So I would ask that the council give this a deliberative effort and remand this back to the Open Space Advisory Board so that there can be more community and public engagement before a significant change to this Open Space Trust Fund as is being proposed by O2179. So thank you very much for your comments. I mean, you're allowing me to comment.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. And for the record, I would like to make sure the public knows that all counselors are now present via Zoom for the FGO meeting today. Welcome.
Madam Chair, our next speaker is Twyla Mccomb. Twyla, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, councilors. The Open Space Advisory Board is asking for a deferral of Ordinance 2179 for the following reasons. As you heard, the citizens of Albuquerque came together 40 years ago to create this fund, and over the years, it's actually strengthened the open space program. While it's true it's not earning what it used to, it still brings in about $200,000 a year. At the beginning of this year, OSAB, as citizens of today's Albuquerque, decided as advisors of this trust that we needed to get serious about updating the current trust into the 21st century. We've explored several different ideas, the last being an investment strategy that's more like what's being used by the state of New Mexico and actually could increase the earnings. We want to advance the trust fund to meet today's needs. All citizens need a voice. We are but one group. We ask that you allow time for all citizens who wish to comment. We're asking for time to review new investment ideas that may meet even more of open space needs in our future. Last, there are many gaps and errors in this legislation. Ideas half-formed and details left unsaid lead to ambiguities that confuse and confound the citizens of Albuquerque, and they need to be reviewed very carefully before a vote. Thank you guys for hearing me today, and please know that I have myself and a few other board members here today that would be available when this comes up if you'd like to speak to us. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Alan Reed. Mr. Reed, please feel free to turn your video back on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and councilors. I was one of the 2 or 3 people that founded the Open Space Trust Fund, and there were 3 long-term historic grounds for us to do that. The trust fund was intended to pay for itself, and I have some numbers I want to give you in a moment. It was intended to allow for its investment income to fund much of what was needed to maintain and expand the open space program, because we anticipated what exactly has happened in the bill that's before you, O2179, and that is that it would always be tempting for somebody to siphon off the money for other purposes and to use all the earnings from it for general operations of the city or for some other favored department, and not to keep the money where the open space program would benefit. And as you know, grounds, land don't have votes, but land users vote. And this has been one of the most popular programs that you could imagine in the city, whether it's in referendum on the bond issues or in terms of the population going through the 30,000 acres that we have. In financial terms, which is a key issue for you, in 2015, when I first came out of retirement, if I may say that, to help out because the whole program was in trouble and people were misunderstanding its purposes and trying to spend it.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Your time is up.
Oh, okay.
Madam Chair, I'd like to hear the rest of Mr. Reed's comments.
Please continue, Mr. Reed.
Madam Chairman, I appreciate it. And I'll just finish this with this because I think the numbers are important. This is a 25-year summary of the trust fund's financial condition from 1990 through 2014. And in those 25 years, the fund itself raised $22 million directly for the use of the program and the city's purposes. $22 million earned, not taxed, is nothing to sneeze at. And it has been mishandled in a couple of serious ways to reduce its earnings, and they're just beginning now to recover. For example, we entirely missed this huge growth in the stock market in the past 5 years or so, unfortunately. But it is producing $200,000 or $300,000 a year, and I don't consider that to be worth giving up. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and for the chance to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Our next speaker is Richard Barish. Mr. Barish, please feel free to turn your video on, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Madam Chair and committee members, my name is Richard Barish, and I'm here on behalf of the Sierra Club also to speak in opposition and out of concern with O79. The Open Space Trust Fund was designed to create a permanent source of funds to acquire open space land. There's a corpus that's invested to generate income that can then be spent. This bill would eliminate the investment provisions. It would allow the principal to be spent, and it would authorize the funds to be spent not only on land acquisition, but also on capital projects. This bill essentially allows for the termination of the fund. Committee members, we need all the money that we can devote to open space to be used to acquire open space lands. Excuse me. Before those lands are developed and before they become even more expensive and unaffordable. We have a wonderful open space system here in Albuquerque. It's one of the really outstanding amenities and attractions to life in Albuquerque. We should do everything we can to enhance and complete the open space system by leaving the Open Space Trust Fund intact and available for land acquisition. I was going to talk a bit about the need to improve the investment strategy of the fund, but that's already been discussed, and I totally agree with that. But the fact that it may not have been realizing as much money as it could have in recent years is not a reason to terminate the fund. We need to have that money available for the acquisition of open space. And finally, I also agree that this is a serious matter, and it's a matter that should be given more time for deliberation and consideration and for public comment and involvement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barish. Our next speaker is Peggy Norton. Ms. Norton, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and councilors. I am president of the North Valley Coalition. We rushed this through our executive committee this weekend. And I sent in written comments this morning summarizing our views of opposition to 079. I would agree with most of what others have said. I'm pleased to be in the parties of such esteemed people taking time to voice opinions on this. I wish there was more money for capital improvements. I wish there was more money for maintenance of open space, but I don't think dissolving the trust fund and using it for those sources is what we want to do. A trust fund should be permanently set up, has been permanently set up, and we all would like more money, but it's a valuable fund that supports a wonderful, wonderful program here in Albuquerque. Thank you for your time. I am sorry that I will not be here when the legislation is discussed because I would really like to hear the justification for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. Our next speaker is Barb Taylor. Ms. Taylor, please feel free to turn your video back on, unmute yourself, and we'll begin when you start speaking.
Ms. Taylor, do you have your TV on in the background or a phone or another that might be feedback?
I do not.
Or are you watching this on a different source? Because sometimes that feedback will happen.
I do not. I am just got my computer on.
If you can make sure, is it your computer what you're talking to us on right now?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
No.
Madam Chair, maybe she could just call in so we could hear her. Can she do that?
Yeah, if there's another source that's on with this meeting, it's going to have feedback that way as well. So we just need to make sure there's only one source typically.
No, it's my system. Okay.
Ms. Taylor, if you want to call in, we can access your public comment that way. If you have the agenda near you, there's a phone number on there that you can dial in. And I have a number that ends in 9689 for you. If that would be the number that you'd be calling in, I can look out for that number, allow you to provide your comment that way. Madam Chair, if it's okay, do you mind if we just move on to the next speaker, then we can come back to Ms. Taylor?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Moya.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker would be Renee Horvath. Ms. Horvath, your time will begin when you start speaking.
Okay, thank you. This is Renee Horvath, and I'm calling from the phone. I just heard about the open space bill, and I'd just like to make a comment. I do agree that we should keep the trust fund intact. It's been, many groups have relied on it over the years, and it's been very helpful to open space. So we probably want to keep that intact. Also, I would like to keep the Open Space Advisory Board intact in providing comments on open space issues. And then third, I do appreciate that Councilor Harris had the 2% GO bond in effect. It's been very helpful to acquire land as it acquires more money to acquire land, such as the lands in the Harris and La Quintista. It's been very helpful for that. And it looks like when I look at his bill, he wants to extend it longer than what's listed currently, which is 2035, that we may want to keep, it a permanent fund. And if he wants to increase it, I'm all for that, because open space is very important, and we do need adequate funds to purchase the lands, and we still could use some buffer lands around the petroglyph areas and other areas on the west side, and I think still need money for the Harris also. So I would support making the GO bond the 2% more permanent, and increase the amount currently so we can acquire more and get ahead of the game before we lose some of the lands that are important to us. So those are the comments I want to make, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Ms. Horvath, so are you in favor of this bill, or are you looking that it should be amended? Or I'm a little confused about what it is that your ultimate goal is.
Well, probably amend it to address the concerns that people raised today. I would keep the Open Space Trust Fund intact, keep the Open Space Advisory Board strong, and but I do support the 2% GO bond, and making it more effective in acquiring land that needs to be purchased before we lose it. So I guess I'd say I am in favor of amending it.
Thank you. Mr. Moya?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Taylor, are you still there? It looked like you had another account on the meeting, and I removed that other one, so I'm hoping that may have addressed the issue. If you can try muting yourself and seeing if that works.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Barbara Taylor. Madam Chair, councilors, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and fixing whatever the problem was. I am a member of the Open Space Advisory Board, and as my colleagues have said, we are asking you to defer this bill until the new year. I want to point out that the advisory board started thinking about the future of the trust fund. We've been getting annual reports for years, but the future of the trust fund when the issues associated with the pool property arose. Our research does suggest that there may be other more aggressive options to invest this fund and to get a better return. And the board would like the opportunity to pursue that, to bring in neutral outside advisors, financial advisors, and legal advisors. But I would also like to point out that the fund is returning $200,000 plus a year, and that's not nothing. I mean, for example, a whole lot of work was done on restoration and improvement of the bosque on the east side of the river, but not nearly as much on the west side of the river. So $200,000 a year would go a very long way towards removing non-natives and improving the habitat on the west side of the river. There are any number of issues at Elena Gallegos that $200,000 could be used to address, and I could go on, but that's not productive. There is plenty of opportunity to look to the future, not to have a single solution, but to determine how to go forward with the fund. And we were just requesting that you give us the opportunity to do that. So thank you, and thank you for fixing my problem.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Madam Chair, that concludes public comments.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us and for sharing your thoughts. We are now going to move on to agenda item A, which is a presentation from Resource X regarding priority-based budgeting. I would like to
Madam
ask.
Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
before we move on, do you think it would be, since most of those comments were related to item number G, would it be beneficial to hear that item first and then move on to the other items?
Well, we have another company counselor that has joined us for this presentation, so I also don't want to hold them up as well. And then maybe we can move up item G after the presentation. Counselor Harris, thank you.
Yes, I was just going to briefly address some of the comments I heard, and then we'll get back to the presentation. First of all, there's an amendment which is going to clarify that the funds can only be used for actual purchase of land. So there will not be any capital expenditures. I was thinking about adding some fences and crusher fine trails, but if you have any language that could be used for capital, it could be perhaps used in a broader way. That won't. Second of all, I want to just clarify, they've been talking about a trust fund. This is not a trust fund, it's a bank account. A trust fund has three different parties: as a settlor, a trustee, and a beneficiary. The city of Albuquerque is all three of these. This is an account we can use at our discretion. I want to point out that I sponsored the 2% for open space, and that generates $3.2 million every 2 years. If you use Mr. Reed's math, without considering appreciation, we're going to be getting about 48 million in the next 25 years. That's not considering how much land is appreciating. So, I mean, this has been replaced by something that really makes a difference, unlike the 200,000 a year. And all purchases will still have to go through the Open Space Advisory Board. And the most important thing is not only has this fund been underperforming the consumer price index and the appreciation of land, the most important thing is land is disappearing. It's going away. So by the time we actually have enough money to purchase anything significant, the land very likely will be gone, especially the land around the petroglyphs that's subject to development pressure. So for those reasons, I want to make sure that people know. And by the way, I will sit down and talk to anybody about this and explain why $50 million or $3.2 million every year, which by the way, increases as the bond program increases. So $3.2 million every 2 years is way better than $200,000 a year. And so we have replaced it with something. We're going to make it an ordinance, so it can't just be amended on the fly on the dais during the budget process. So we have done something that's way, way better than this, and it's just time to reconsider. So with that, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Harris. And I invite you to share some of that again when we're refocusing on this bill as well, please. And so now we're going to move on to the presentation from Resource X regarding priority-based budgeting. And then we'll adjust the agenda just a little bit with that. But we have Mr. Chris Fabian here. I would like to invite Mr. Muniz from our council office to go ahead and help us with a little introduction, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Fabian is here today. Up until recently, there had been a lot of discussion in council about updating the budget ordinance. And so the conversation started coming into play of, what are some other opportunities, or what were some other ways that we could update how we, conduct the budget process. I first met Mr. Fabian a few years back at ICMA, which is the International City County Management Association, at a conference, and was really impressed with the methodology, what they call priority-based budgeting, and how it could help communities better understand their programs and how to evaluate those programs and actually look to see, are there opportunities to reallocate funds in those programs. So for example, if communities are having disparities and equity in budgeting certain areas, that this would be an opportunity to kind of really evaluate and dig in where those disparities exist and how those can be reduced. So that's basically it in a nutshell. Again, it's more of how to understand our resources and how to better align those with priorities in our government. So from there, I'm going to let Mr. Fabian explain away what priority-based budgeting is, and the hopes are it could spark a conversation amongst everyone. So thank you, Mr. Fabian.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair and counselors and committee members for inviting me virtually. I'm in Denver, Colorado, but very pleased to join you today. I have a brief presentation. I'm going to keep it to about 10 minutes or less and hopefully have some time for Q&A, but I would love to provide you a little bit of education around what Mr. Muniz was just talking about. We have created a process called priority-based budgeting, and it is now being used in just over 300 local governments across the United States and into Canada. Organizations of your caliber and your size, like Denver, Colorado, where I live, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Kansas City, Missouri, Madison, Wisconsin, and others. It is a process that builds upon your budget, your line item budget, and your use of programs and services in a way that connects those resource allocation decisions to the results that ultimately matter most to you and to your community. We founded the company in part because of a lot of the conversation that was taking place earlier in your public comment, that for local government leaders, and I worked in local government as well prior to starting Resource X, there just appears to be a never-ending situation of resource scarcity. We just don't have enough resources to pursue the objectives that we're hoping to accomplish. It's not just during the Great Recession, even in times when things feel abundant and we can certainly balance the budget, there are new needs that we must find ways to resource. And so that is the purpose of the company. And that is the purpose of priority-based budgeting, is to find those readily available resources by transforming the budget process and prioritizing the resources that you have. So as Jesse had mentioned, we are a best practice with the Government Finance Officers Association. That's over on the left-hand side of my slide. GFOA is their acronym. They represent finance professionals across the world. And their focus right now in their recognition of excellence in budgeting is to have reporting at the program level and to allow elected officials and department heads to be able to see those resource alignments in terms of your investment in the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. And over on the right-hand side, as Jesse mentioned as well, the International City and County Management Association, ICMA, is for the first time in 2022, we're happy to say, involving priority-based budgeting in their credentialed manager certificate. So city managers will need to have education in priority-based budgeting as part of their recognition for professional education in their credentialed manager program. And the reason we're so happy to see both GFOA and ICMA, not to mention the National League of Cities, headed in this direction, is simply the recognition that traditional budgeting, certainly at the line item level, is 100 years old this year. And in order for us to be able, as local government leaders, to approach our needs effectively in the 21st century, we need new skill sets. We need our budget to work better for us. And getting to a program and service level for the types of trade-off decisions we need to make and aligning programs with results that you're hoping to accomplish in order to drive conversations around resource reallocation resource alignment and finding those readily available resources to fund your future is absolutely imperative for the future of local government. So I talked about the kind of change that our clients hope to make, and I just wanted to share by way of a few case study examples what that begins to look like. I know that the city of Albuquerque is one of the many participants in the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge. And just last year, we had the chance to work with one of your partner cities in that program, and that was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh, like so many cities across the country right now, is very focused on a priority in terms of having resources to fund their climate action plan. And yet when they called us, this was the disconnect. They look at their climate action plan, it's full of great initiatives that are very important. And yet when it came time for the budget process, there's simply no money for that. Their sustainability director, Grant Irvin, described how in the budget process, their climate initiatives were described as unicorn projects, as if they don't exist. They're fictitious. We'll never have the resources to fund them. So they implemented priority-based budgeting with us, identifying every program, allocating resources to their programs and services, and through a rigorous analysis of alignment of programs with results, we then drove a host of very transformative discussions in the budget process to look for resource reallocation opportunities, for which they found 23 million in resource reallocation efforts. And not just reallocating from within, but another lever that you have is to look for resources outside of your organization, become entrepreneurial and look for partnerships in the region. And for that, they generated another 18 million in creative new revenue generating pursuits. All of this beyond the tax lever to find $41 million to redirect towards climate action. This was just published in just a few days ago, November 18th. I encourage you, if you would like to read further about Pittsburgh's story, the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, who is a partner in the Climate Challenge Cities program, has just written an article about their experience overall. So that's using priority-based budgeting for climate. Same recipe, different priority. Here where I live is the city and county of Denver. And when Mayor Michael Hancock was elected, he ran on a platform of creating a more equitable city for our residents and wanted to see that reflected in the budget process. But when they reached out to us, the perceived disconnect was that the city was very clear about the definition of equity. They hired their first ever chief equity officer, set up an office of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yet when the budget recommendations were starting to come forward, this unplugged sense was what they felt. It just seemed like the budget requests were the same as they typically are. There are a lot of needs overall across the city, but it was very tough to see do any of these have anything to do with our pursuit of equity overall. So in our analysis, long story short, when all we have to use in the budget process are line items in order to justify our budget recommendations, and we look at things like travel and training or clothing supplies and so on and so forth, it's actually fairly non-intuitive for departments to take these line items and imagine, how can I make a change to cleaning supplies and materials that puts this budget more in line with our equity objective? However, when we could transform this data to not only see line items and personnel, but to see these are resource components of a service like snow removal, when we talk in terms of programs and the results like equity that they're meant to achieve, it opened up the doorway for department heads to create budget recommendations that were far more in line with the mayor's objective. As an example, in Denver, where it used to snow, we haven't seen our first snow yet of the year. And we talk about snow removal. For many residents who don't own vehicles, they really depend on public sidewalks to get to the bus stop or access public transportation in order to get to their jobs or the grocery store or even City Hall. And when it snows, those sidewalks are iced over and snow packed, and they're not traversable. So a budget recommendation was a service level increase for snow removal to apply a higher level of service in certain neighborhoods to keep sidewalks clear in order to make sure that people had access to public transportation and ultimately to economic prosperity. So it was budget recommendation after budget recommendation that is transformative in Denver. Once we can get to the service level, aligning resources with those investments and services to results, it's a breakthrough to create better budget development requests. So to try to describe this, I know this is probably a small slide, but when we start with line item information and we look from one year to the next, even when we're layering on things like non-personnel and personnel data, it's a forest from the trees situation. And what we want to be able to get to are truly the trade-offs that you're making, the resource reallocation opportunities that you have, ultimately revenue generating opportunities that you have as well. And I think I can describe this for you in a couple of quick slides, and then I did want to make sure we had some time for discussion. You have some great data to bring to the table. You have a line item budget. You also have programs and services. What we would do is create the missing data that perhaps doesn't exist, coming to understand your strategic plan, the types of results that you're hoping to accomplish, and build a complete data set that actually recenters the budget conversation away from line item trade-offs to program and service level trade-offs in light of the results that you're striving to achieve. How much more would we have to reallocate in order for you to fund your climate action goals or your equity objectives? And in doing so, we move from using line item data as our business intelligence to more program and results oriented business intelligence. And that's the transformation in the budget process. With that data, we actually drive an exercise called Program Insights. And the spirit of it is that every single program that you offer has a future to it, has a fate, a direction, a trajectory. Maybe the direction of cybersecurity in your IT department, for example, is a service level increase that needs new resources. And if you're looking back on today, 5 years from now, and your cybersecurity program is still funded at the same level, you'll say, I wish we had more resources to be able to fund that. Whereas on the other hand of the equation, we have resource reallocation opportunities. We have revenue generating opportunities. We have partnerships we could explore. And through the budget, the objective is to mine those opportunities and bring them to life. So the creation of Program Insights is something new in the budget, is where are we headed with that particular program overall? All of this to create a state of action where we are executing on those recommendations and actually coming with an adopted budget. I'm going to stop there and turn it back over for any questions. I know it's a short period of time, but hopefully you get the gist of the transformation that can take place, but would love to hear some of your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Fabian. Counselors, do you have questions? Counselor Pena, if we can stop sharing the screen, that would be great. Okay, thank you. Counselor Pena?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. I kind of recall this from before. Did we actually do this before? Or I think it's Jesse, do you know?
The administration might be an answer, but if I remember back when I was in Department of Finance, there were some discussions with the previous director about possibly bringing this methodology into play, but I'll let the administration answer on this one.
Okay, thanks. Because I kind of remember some discussion somewhere, something about it, and it was kind of a process that we were already doing, if it's my memory serves me correctly. But anyway, so I'll let the administration answer that.
Good afternoon, councilors. I think I have actually met Mr. Chris Fabian in past. Hi, Chris, how are you? We did have lengthy discussion. I also remember that you actually came to see me in my office and we had gone through this, if I'm not wrong, maybe Olivia Padilla-Jackson, who was at one time in charge of budget, also attended one of your seminar or something in Denver. And then you invited us again in 2019. The issue we have is that we are kind of doing what you are suggesting us to do without calling it what you are doing, without calling it exactly the same name. And I think we have this IPC, which basically prioritize things for us, the administration and the council. And I think I would like to have maybe Lawrence kind of tell this group what we do in budget, which is basically reflect what Chris is trying to kind of have us use.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So we do some form of priority-based budgeting now at the City of Albuquerque. Essentially, it's kind of the same thing. We have the Indicator Progress Commission, and its sole responsibility is for coordinating the review of indicators important to the community and the conditions. And they do this in a 5-year, from a 5-year outlook perspective. Specifically, it states the Indicator Progress Commission is composed of 12 citizen members appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of City Council. The members represent a cross-section of private and public organizations, representing community-based organizations, business organizations, educational institutions, and community service organizations. And what they do is they get together, the citizens, and they establish the goals for the city. Currently, we have 8 goals. First goal, and I can run through them. This is in the budget document. We have human and family development, public safety, yada, yada. We have eight goals. And then from there, what City Council does every year is they set their priority objectives. So if they say, for public safety, what do we want the administration specifically to do this year to achieve the goal that the IPC has set for us? So from there, the City Council will insert specific 1-year priority objectives, and then they'll measure those throughout the fiscal year. And then that prioritizes each program and its effective outcomes. And then within there is specific performance measures that are directly linked to that program, which directly links to the 8 goals of the city that the IPC has initially set up. So it's really integrated, but it's really driven by the priorities set by the citizen committee from the Indicator Progress Commission throughout the city. So it does push from the highest level, the 8 goals, all the way down to each program and to each department level within each department, each division within each department. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for any questions. But we do basically priority-based budgeting without calling it priority-based budgeting.
Councilor Pena, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, Madam Chair. So my question is that, when we're talking about equity-based budgeting, I know I had been talking with some folks from the administration, and they said that they were doing that. And then, if my memory serves me correctly again, is that's why we passed that resolution this year about making sure that it's not just this administration, but other administrations, that they continue on that path. So it's not just necessarily a priority of the administration. So I'm under the impression that accomplishes that. And then, just about the committee, the indicator community committee that you're talking about, is that still operational, or is that part of?
There is a question, right?
Yes.
Madam Chair, Councilor Pena, that is correct. Our Department of Performance and Innovation is actually heading that effort, and they're in the process as we speak. So every 2 years they get together, look at all the different factors that impact the community, and they may come up with 10 goals or 5 goals, depending on what they are driven to do that year. They may reprioritize each goal, but now we have 1 through 8, and of course the highest ones are human and family development and public safety. But yes, we do that. That commission is active and still working very vigilantly.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess since I still have Mr. Fabian on the line, this is essentially performance-based budgeting, correct?
There is a distinction if you want to. I could split hairs for you in a marvelous way, but it is.
I'd love to hear it. So
okay,
go ahead.
So the distinction that you'll hear from Government Finance Officers Association is that performance-based budgeting means you're using performance data of your programs in order to drive budget decisions. Is something performing? Do we fund it more? Is something not performing? Do we take resources away? Priority-based budgeting incorporates performance-based budgeting, but even asks one more question, which is, we're not only interested in performance, but relevance of a program. So you could have a high-performing program that is actually low on relevance, for which you don't care too much about it. It's high-performing towards something that matters less to you, as opposed to a program that is performing towards a highly relevant objective like equity or climate action or so on and so forth. And that's the distinction.
Okay, well, that's great. So that takes it one step higher, I guess you could say, in the spectrum of budgeting processes. Do you anticipate that this would help in terms of managing more cost-effective, more cost-efficient budgeting for the city?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we just heard from administration that you have many practices that are definitely way further along than most communities in the United States. I think where some of your opportunities may exist include using that data in order to drive very specific resource reallocation opportunities, resource maximization opportunities, partnerships across the region for optimization of resources across your community. Those are maybe the next frontiers that are possible for you.
Thank you so much. Madam Chair, I just mentioned that I think this is a great tool for budgeting for the future, because not only does it do performance-based budgeting, but it also incorporates another element of that, which, we can go back and look at some of our ordinances that we've already passed to see if they're effective or not. And I think it would really help us as we move forward into the future. Of course, I'm not going to be here, but it maximizes our opportunity for the city. So I'm happy to see this.
If I may, one quick comment on what you just said in terms of ordinances, that becomes something very intriguing to do with your data as well. Every program gets tagged with some metadata, some data on your programs, meaning you might want to search for what programs do you currently have city imposed legislation that requires you to do something, and that program may have less to do with the outcomes that you're striving to achieve. And that you always end up with a bucket of programs that you say, we're requiring this of ourselves, and these programs have less to do with the objectives that we are trying to accomplish. What can we do about those programs? Maybe our ordinance is outdated. Maybe it needs a refreshment. Those are
just one more quick question, Madam Chair. Since we're on this topic, are we going to need enhancements regarding technology as we move this forward? And I don't know if that's a question for you or for Jesse.
Our tools are cloud-based, so it is accessible via the internet from your laptop computers, your desktop computers, as opposed to the need to install any sort of new technology overall.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, Mr. Fabian.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here and giving us that information.
You bet. I tremendously appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Have a happy holiday.
You too.
All right. So I would like to, per the request earlier, let's go ahead and hear item G first on our agenda, 079. Counselor Harris.
Yes, I'd like to move 079 without recommendation.
All right, Counselor Senna with a second. Thank you.
And first thing I'd like to do is to move, I have an amendment that should be in your packet. Should be amendment, should be the only amendment. And I don't think I need to read this, but what it does is it removes capital improvements within the open space every time it comes up. And the reason for this is I initially thought that it might be helpful when we're purchasing open space land, if we could also use it for things like pressure fine trails or fencing. Like, for instance, we purchased an archaeological site in my district, and it had a very ugly old chain link fence. We put a very nice fence around it that was wrought iron and helped preserve it. But I can see how people could be alarmed that and capital improvements could mean a swimming pool or whatever in an open space. So we just want to avoid that. We don't need this. We can use other funds for capital improvements. So I'd like to move floor amendment number 1.
All right, thank you, Councilor. Okay, Councilor Sena with a second. Councilors, any questions or comments?
Madam Chair, Councilor Harris, could we just go back to that amendment? Because I want to see the explanation again.
Sure.
And just want to discuss that.
Okay.
So you're deleting the references to the fund's ability to be used for purchase of capital improvements with an open space deletion. I'm not sure I'm understanding that. Could you explain that to me, please?
Well, I think what Mr. Barish and other folks were concerned about is that if you allow capital improvements to be used within open space, then let's use an extreme example. The county has set aside money for open space, but usually most of their money is actually used for parks and things like that. So what if we were to decide that the Los Altos Park is open space, and therefore Councilor Gibson golf cart electronic building would be something. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that the fund would just be used for purchasing land. It would not be used for any other purpose, including what I initially had in mind is like crusher fine trails or fences and things like that, or park benches. But that language could be used and misused for a much broader endeavor. So just to make people, it seemed to be a significant concern of the people on the Open Space Advisory Board and the CR Club is that it could be used for other purposes other than land purchase. So let's just remove that.
Councilor Borrego, do you have a follow-up at all, or is that good?
No, that's good. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Hinojos, if you'll please take a vote on the amendment.
Councilor Borrego,
Yes, on the amendment.
Councilor Harris,
Yes.
Councilor Peña, Councilor Peña, Councilor Sena,
Yes.
Councilor Basan.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Councilor Harris, back to you.
Sure, I'd like to go to the administration now, because one of the other concerns about the notion that this fund, which by the way has been going down, we've been using it for needed land purchases over the years, including the land along in Boston. And so, I mean, at one point, when 40 years ago, when there was high interest and high inflation, we actually did get a return, and we had no money in the corpus. But most important is that now what people are saying is let's invest it differently. Let's get more aggressive. And I think the administration has some thoughts about that. I'd like to ask the administration about the notion that we should be or can be investing this fund more aggressively and making a better return.
So, can you hear me?
Yes, please
Hi,
proceed.
this is Chris Daniel. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for the city. And with respect to the investment strategy for the Open Space Trust Fund, I am following the interpretation that myself and the Investment Oversight Committee, which is the trustee per ordinance for the fund, have been interpreting. And it basically states that 90% of fund earnings are available for spending. We've interpreted earnings to mean interest income and not changes in market value, which would produce a very wide range of fluctuation in spendable income if we incorporated that component. In other words, the price change component. So I was looking back over the past 30 years of the fund. And by the way, the fund was placed with the State Investment Council up through March of 2011. And then we took it back and eventually in 2015 started managing it in a more strategic way in a total bond market fund. But in any event, the fund, even when it was with the SIC, was tracking the return of the total bond market. And, for many years, interest rates in the investment grade corporate bond funds were earning, 5 to 8 to 10%. And now you're fortunate to get 2%. So, we are basically doing the best we can do. And as far as a more aggressive strategy, we feel like that without placing the money back in an avenue like State Investment Council, where it could be invested in equities, we do not have the authority to invest in investments other than fixed income. So those are our constraints, and we're investing as prudently as possible within those.
And let me ask the administration, in terms of the $12 million more or less that's there, and there was talk about using this fund for the pool property, I think the most recent one. Are there concerns that if something else, an opportunity came up like that again, and it wasn't state money, that we just would be out of luck?
I didn't hear the question.
Could you repeat that, sir?
In terms of opportunities for use of this money and the land that could be, did the administration talk about that?
So I think what you're asking is if with the pool property, with the amount of revenue that was being generated, how long would it have taken? It would have taken a substantial amount of time to be able to purchase the pool property if we were only relying on investment income from the fund. We were able to purchase the pool property now because we had state tax dollars, state capital funds that were given by state legislators. But it would take, I think, about 26 years based on the amount of revenue now to been able to generate enough revenue to be able to purchase something like the pool property. So if we didn't have access to the state dollars, it's unlikely, it would have been difficult, or we would have had to look for other places to find it. But yeah, based on the revenue that's being generated right now, it'd be difficult to use revenue from the fund to be able to purchase a property like the pool property.
And I don't know if anyone from real property here, maybe we can do that at council, but in terms of land that is currently threatened, I'm specifically concerned about land around the petroglyphs that could be targets for development. Is there concerns in the administration about being able to act if something like that comes up?
Once again, if a piece of property and the petroglyphs were to become available for sale, we would, currently the way that this fund is structured, we wouldn't be able to use the revenue or the corpus from this fund to be able to purchase that property unless a resolution was passed saying that we were going to use that money. So we would have to look for alternative sources to be able to purchase property, let's say around the petroglyph or anything else that became available for that was available for us to buy.
Okay, and has the administration done an analysis of whether or not the fund has been beating or falling behind the increase in land prices?
You're speaking with, is it falling behind or beating the inflation rate? Was that the question, sir?
Inflation rate, and particularly vacant land prices for open space, to the extent you can see what the signal.
I can't speak to commercial property values. I don't track that, but what I can say is with respect to inflation, the corporate bond market has basically kept time with inflation the last few years, but not really exceeded it. What has happened is that since 2008 and 2009, when rates have become extremely compressed, most any type of investment grade fixed income instrument is considered to have a very low risk above treasuries and agency securities. So you'll see those rates pretty much right on top of treasuries. For instance, right now, a 10-year T-bill is about 1.7%, and you're probably going to yield just under 2% on a corporate bond fund. So there's not much of a spread there. And of course, inflation, has been running around 2%, maybe a little bit less, but it's starting to accelerate now. So we'll see if that has an impact on increasing yields in the future.
Okay, and I did see something from the city economist. I don't know if she's there, that there was an analysis of commercial property, and it did seem that commercial property was increasing at a faster clip than inflation. Are you guys aware of that?
Madam Chair, members of the council, but I did note that I cannot speak for the local economy and commercial property prices. I mean, and so I would be uncomfortable doing so.
But nationally, that's the trend. Is that?
I mean, nationally in some markets, yes, we can see that commercial property prices are going up, but I just can't speak with authority for that.
Okay, maybe we can still work on that.
Councillor Harris, I would just add that, we do presentation to our bond rating agencies, and in that context, we discuss the housing price in Albuquerque, which had been really growing pretty fast. And, there is no separate data on the commercial properties, but in general, real estate is going up higher than the inflation rate, overall inflation rate. And certainly it is much higher than the earning we have on this fund. So in this fund right now, I can say that the earning is not going to be more than 2%. That is for sure. And even if, let's say, we have an aggressive approach and we put perhaps 20% of that fund into equity market, which is considered very aggressive, again, in long run, that return would be probably 6%. But then we have a couple of other technical issues. If it increases in the value, that value is just on book until we sell those investments. We don't have that income, which we can then use for acquiring the property. So we have a little bit of dilemma there. Even though we don't have the specific number on commercial properties, I think overall, because the housing market is growing pretty substantially every year, I'm pretty confident that land value also goes up pretty substantially, and it's much higher than the inflation rate overall.
Okay, thank you. And so let me just go through some of the things. I'm really kind of surprised that this is just not so obvious a benefit. What I mean by that is that the arguments in favor of the trust fund might have some weight if we didn't have the 2% for open space in the bond cycle. And what this legislation does is that it takes off the sunset, but even more important, it makes it an ordinance. Because right now it's a 2% for open space, but we all know those things can get fiddled with on the dais during a budget committee hearing. If it's just a resolution, it can be amended with a resolution. You can get 5 votes and decide that we're not going to spend that much money on open space this time around, and that would create a terrible precedent. But if we make it an ordinance and we take off the sunset, that would be $3.2 million the next bond cycle. But again, as property values increase, that 3.2 million increases. So we're talking about, if you cut 3.2 million in half, because it's every 2 years, right? So it's 1.6 million. As Ms. Taylor said, 200,000 isn't nothing. No, but it's still, the amount of money we get from the bond is 800% more than this. And meanwhile, we're sitting on $12 million, which could be used to protect land that is disappearing, and as we just heard from the administration, is increasing in value at a faster rate than our returns on this investment. There seems to be some confusion about strengthening the Open Space Advisory Board. Right now, the ordinance says that all purchases have to go through them, and that will continue. And we're going to have lots and lots of funds, and with this, if this passes, it's going to be in perpetuity. That the Open Space Advisory Board will have a lot of opportunities. And we have something that's actually better than the trust fund. We have our land prices in the city of Albuquerque that increase year over year as they are. So our bonding capacity is going to go up, and the 2% is going to go up. And as land prices increase, it's going to increase at a much faster rate than this investment. So really, what we have is something that might have made sense 40 years ago when we had double-digit inflation and when we actually had more money that was in there, but that's been spent down. But right now, we have an opportunity around our city to use this fund to actually purchase land. And despite, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that land, that's the only thing that's a cliche. It's the only thing that God doesn't make you more of, right? So after land is gone, it's gone forever. And if we hadn't purchased all, in my part of the city, all the foothills back when it was affordable, that would all be, high-end houses right now. And I am concerned about the sand dunes. I am concerned about the land around the pet. If we don't nail that down when next time it comes up, it's going to be houses, and it's going to be a tragedy, and we're going to wish that we had passed this and had that flexibility when we need it, because the amount of revenue that this council has put in place, and with this ordinance will actually keep in place for perpetuity, is so much more. Just completely blows away. It's over 800% what this trust fund produces, and we could just use this fund in such a better way. So that's my analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Harris. Councilors, do you have any questions? I have a couple questions, seeing that there's no other questions at this moment in time. So I hear that we want to purchase and preserve what open space lands are available. Do we know approximately how many of those in general and approximately still exist in Albuquerque that we could potentially purchase and preserve for open space?
There is a priority list that the Open Space Advisory Board has and updates. Excuse me. Could we get that to all the councilors, please? I'm asking the administration, I guess. The administration, there's a priority list, I believe, or open space.
Yes, Councilor Harris, there is a priority list for councilors for the open space that the Open Space Advisory Board puts together, and we can go ahead and have that forwarded to the councilors.
Thank you. I think a fresh copy of that to the top of our inbox would be beneficial, because I do recognize that if we don't purchase and preserve these properties to keep them as open space, they inevitably probably will be developed. I mean, and so what is the anticipation that lands will remain undeveloped if we don't purchase and preserve them? I guess for the administration, do we anticipate that these will not be built on if we don't protect them?
Madam Chair, what I'd have to do is reach out to the Parks Department to see exactly which pieces in the priority list are potentially that are in danger of being purchased or developed on. We don't have that information in front of me right now, but we can reach out and we can get that to the counselors at a later date.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Padilla. I see that Director Simon is on the call on the Zoom right now. Is he available?
Can I jump in? Well,
yeah,
sure.
I think he's available.
One of the criteria that they use, but only one, for the priority of open spaces is the pressure of future development. Now, there are certain open space, like for instance in the Terrace Royal, no one really believes that that's going to be developed anytime soon. But the reason why I'd like to see that purchased is because it connects our open space. It connects the Four Hills Manzano open space with the Foothills open space. And then it's a biozone and it's a lot of private property and we own about half of it. So that's for another project, is to connect all that open space. But so that's why it's a priority, because it's very pristine, it's beautiful. But there are other properties on the open space priority list, which are there in large part because there's a pressure for future development. And I believe that all that is broken out in the priority analysis.
Thank you, Councilor Harris. Well, I don't see Director Simon yet, but I have one more question. Oh, never mind. Hi, Director. Good evening, or I think we're almost at evening. So Director, I was just wondering roughly, how many open space properties could we potentially eventually purchase? And, what is the chance of them being developed if we don't purchase them to preserve them as open space?
Madam Chair and members of the committee, we have currently, I believe, 11 properties on the priority acquisition list, but due to the strong actions of the council and the mayor, one of them we purchased in March. So there actually are 10 properties still on our list. I think in answer to your question, first part of your question, they're on the list because we should buy them all. And that should be our goal. Of the 10 properties that are on the list, I'd say that maybe one or two are facing what I'd call stronger development pressure. The other 7 or 8 less so. One of the big differences in just using the most recent purchase, which is the pool property as our only yardstick, is that property was under maximum development pressure. And we wound up paying $300,000 an acre for the property. That's typically not the kind of land prices we pay when we're out ahead of the curve and trying to purchase properties that have not gained entitlements. So, but in answer to your question, I think we should be our goal to buy them all, everything on the list now. And I think when we complete that task, there'll be others that come up that will replace the ones we buy. So I think the job will be really never finished for a long, long time if we're going to really protect the patrimony of the city in terms of its open space and natural values. And again, a couple of them are under some pressure now, none as extreme as the pool property was.
Thank you, Director. And just one more follow-up, and then Councilor Borrego, I will move on to you. But I am just curious. So hearing what the administration was talking about and trying to juggle some of the topics that were being discussed on the financing of it, I'm curious, does the administration think this would be a good idea and beneficial? Because it seems on many levels that the purchase of these properties to preserve them as open space is wise. But I'm curious, were you leaning towards yes, that's a better idea, or no, we shouldn't?
Madam Chair, yeah, we do think it'd probably be a good idea to at least purchase the properties that are in danger of being developed. But since the rate of return isn't is so low, utilizing the funds right now might be a better option than what funds that are inside the account, so that we can purchase those properties that are in danger of being developed.
Okay, thank you. That was the answer I was looking for. I appreciate it. Councilor Borrego.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I support what, in principle, what Councilor Harris is doing with regard to looking at the return on our money. I think that's really super important to, acquiring future lands. I also support the amendment that you just made. I think it helps the bill. What I'm still questioning, Councilor Harris, and I probably want to meet with you about this, is I'm not certain about, the removal of the trust fund per se. If there are ways that we can invest the trust, better ways that we can invest the trust fund, then I think, I want us to definitely look at that. But I still have a few questions and some reservations. I mean, I feel like I haven't, the list that Councilor Bassan was asking for, I have not seen that. So I'd be curious about what those lands are. And I know that I have quite a few on the west side in my district. I'm sure the other councilors have areas that they're interested in as well. I also am interested in maybe a hybrid of this bill. And maybe that's something that we need to look at to the future. But I'm not sure that I see the urgency of getting this done immediately. You know, so I still have a few reservations, Counselor. I have to be honest with you. And I'd like to get some of those questions answered.
One more thing, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
I want to ask Director Simon one more thing, because we talked about the 11 that are on the priority list, but I think there's about 40 or so properties. For instance, Director Simon, are the sand dunes on the priority list?
Madam Chair, Councilor Harris, yes, they are.
Okay, but there are a number of properties that are even below that will rise up into priority, correct? I mean, don't we have about 40 so property that we'd like to have? I mean, what's the list say now?
The list says 11.
Okay.
I think that, you know, there are always other properties that come to our attention and may come to councilors' attention. And as I said before, I think there'll always be some turnover in the list as new priorities take over for old properties. But Councilor, I think, and Madam Chair, Councilor Harris, I think to clarify maybe what your question was, there is one priority on the list, which is a project, not necessarily one property. And that's the Tijeras Biozone project. The Tijeras Biozone is authorized as a program of acquisition. And within the Tijeras Biozone, when we started that effort, there were about 40 properties that were within the biozone. So I think maybe that's what you're referring to. And we have acquired probably already a quarter of those. So you are correct in saying there's more than 10 properties within the 10 priorities on the acquisition list.
And same with some of the properties on the west side. I mean, there's probably several parcels that would be, you know, like the sand dunes might not be one parcel, for instance, or some of the petroglyph properties might not be one parcel. There might be several that are connected.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilor Harris, there's one or two places where you'd have more than one property, although in the case of the sand dunes, that is one intact property.
Okay.
Any other questions, councilors? Councilor Harris to close.
I'd like to move this without recommendation to the full council, and then I'd like to ask immediate action.
Okay, we already had a second on the motion for no rec. So Ms. Hinojos.
Councilor Borrego,
No.
Councilor Harris,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Sena,
Yes.
Councilor Basan.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-1 vote.
Councilor Harris.
I might not get my votes, but I'll try. I'd like to move for immediate action.
Do we have a second, councilors?
Madam Chair, what was the motion? I apologize. I didn't hear
That's
it.
okay. It's a motion for immediate action.
You have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Hinojos.
Councilor Borrego,
No.
Councilor Harris,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Sena, Councilor Basan.
Yes.
That fails. Immediate action motions have to be unanimous.
Thank you, Ms. Hinojos. We are going to move on to agenda item B. This is EC 466. Mayor's recommendation of award to Mitchell International for workers' compensation cost containment service pharmacy benefit management. I move approval. Thank you, Councilor Sena, for the second. Councilors, any questions? All right, Ms. Hinojos, if you'll take the vote. Ms.
Councilor
Hinojos?
Borrego.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilor Harris,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Sena,
Yes.
Councilor Basan.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Agenda item C is EC 467, Mayor's recommendation of award to Jarrett Walker and Associates LLC for ABQ ride system evaluation and redesign. I move approval. Thank you, Counselor Sena with a second. Any questions, counselors? Ms. Hinojos?
Council Borrego,
Yes.
Council Harris. Council Harris. Council Pena.
Yes.
Council Harris says yes.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Sena.
Yes.
Counselor Bassan.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
All right, agenda item D, EC 468, approval of Calle Cuarta development agreement with Yes Housing to utilize workforce housing trust funds and convey city-owned property towards the development of a mixed-use affordable rental housing project. I move approval. Thank you, Counselor Sena. Any questions or comments, counselors? Counselor Sena?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question on this one. And from my understanding, a portion of this housing development would go towards those that are under a certain percentage of average median income. But when I took an evaluation, is it only 11 of the 61? Can I get a clarification of that? Like how much of it is allocated towards affordable housing?
Director Pierce? Welcome. You're on mute, Director.
You'd think I'd know how to do that. I said, thank you, Madam Chair and Councilor Sena. I have Rick Giron from our team here, and if we could invite Rick, who's very involved in this project. Thank you, Rick.
Madam Chair, Councilor Sena, that is incorrect. The total number of units are the 61 units are affordable. It's the agreement calls out the different AMI ranges, but the entire development of the rental portion are affordable.
Right. I mean, I guess I should have put affordable in quotations because I think that is a very loose term these days. I think from my understanding, 65% AMI, there's 3 that would go towards 65% AMI, and then a certain percentage would also go for those that are below 80%. Is that right?
That is correct. And so the units at or below 80% of AMI is typically what the department and the Department of Housing and Urban Development deem affordable. And so I apologize for that, but it is at or below 80% of AMI, and then others that are 60 and 50%, and there are some at 30% as well.
Oh, okay, I didn't quite see the 30%.
In the project description, it does kind of itemize each range at those AMIs.
Okay, and for those listening on, AMI is average median income, is that right? For the area?
Area median income, correct.
Okay. All right, thank you. That answers portions of my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Hinojos?
Council Borrego.
Yes.
Council Harris.
Yes.
Councilor Pena.
Yes.
Councilor Sena.
Yes.
Councilor Bassan.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. We are moving on to agenda item E076. I'm going to move a due pass for Counselor Jones. This is adopting a uniform administrative code and technical codes prescribing minimum standards regulating the construction, alteration, moving, repair, and use and occupancy of buildings and structures and building service equipment and installations including plumbing, swimming pools, electrical, mechanical, science, solar, energy conservation, building conservation, and the abatement of dangerous buildings within the city of Albuquerque, providing for the issuance of permits and collecting fees, therefore repealing Chapter 14, Article 1, ROA 1994, the present Uniform Administrative Code and technical codes, including the building code, the plumbing code, the swimming pool code, the mechanical code, the solar energy code, the electrical code, providing for penalties for violation of the code. I move it to pass. Thank you, Councilor Senna, with the second. Councilors, I have an amendment I would like to move. So I would like to move amendment number 1, and it's to replace the Uniform Administrative Code as originally proposed by O2176 with Exhibit A as attached to this amendment. And I would like to invite Ms. Schultz to come and explain this, as this was by request actually from the administration.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to discuss this amendment. Exhibit A to this amendment is the Uniform Administrative Code itself. It's a 50 to 75 page document that I don't think we need to scroll through in its entirety before the committee this evening. The primary change that this amendment makes is to the elevator inspection requirements. When this committee first heard this item back in September, there were some concerns that the city would just have no purview and no oversight over if elevators were operating safely if they had passed any kind of inspection. And the language that's been proposed through this amendment adds a line to the elevator and escalator inspection section that clarifies that building owners will still need to seek private inspections. They will need to pass those inspections, and those inspection reports will need to be posted on site to ensure that there is proof that those escalators and elevators are still operating in a safe manner.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. And I did move that amendment, but we will need a second if there is anyone. Thank you, Councilor Senna. Any questions or comments, councilors?
Madam Chair, if I also might add, there's been a request for immediate action as well. This has been before the committee since September, and I think the department is ready to get it moved along.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Schultz. We'll go to that after we take the vote on the amendment. Councilor Borrego?
Yes, I have a question regarding the amendment. So my understanding is that the inspection will be done by a private company, and then who would certify that inspection? Because I mean, this is a life safety issue, and right now we have our building department that does that. So I'm just wondering who's going to be certifying the certification.
Madam Chair, I do see Director Varela has come on board, and so have folks from the mayor's office. They might like to speak to that language that does identify who would be conducting those inspections.
Director Varela?
Yes, Chairwoman Bassan and councilors, Councilor Rodego, the elevator inspections right now are conducted by a person who has a certified elevator training certificate, and the requirement would not change. Actually, the vast majority of the people who have that certification are now technicians who are in the elevator industry outside of the city. So it would be a person who has completed the training and is a certified elevator inspector.
Correct, but it would be done by the private sector, right?
It would be done by a licensed professional, much like, for example, engineering drawings are stamped by a licensed engineer. There are licensed professionals out there who would have to do that.
So let me ask you this: if the licensed professional that owns their own company, then the company goes away for some reason, who is going to be held responsible if something happens with that elevator?
And Councilor Borrego, there are numerous licensed professionals out there. These would be an annual requirement. So if a company for some reason were to dissolve, that licensed professional would still exist and that still be able to track that person down. B, that since these are done annually, the chances of a company simply disappearing and there being no companies available is relatively non-existent.
Right, Mr. Varela, it's hard for me to understand that because I was in I was in business at one time doing land development, and one of the companies that I dealt with disappeared basically off the face of the earth and never paid me. But I would like to know, so if I own, if there's a building and I am the person who goes and certifies it, and then my company goes away for whatever reason, I want to know who is going to be held responsible. And that question is not really being answered.
And I'm sorry, Counselor, I'm not really understanding what you mean by being held responsible.
Well, if that elevator is faulty at some point in time, and that has been certified by a company, not the government, a company, who is going to be held responsible?
The property owner, Counselor, would be responsible for a defect within their building.
Councilor Borrego, if I may too, I think that I felt the same thing at first when I was hearing about this. And my understanding is that because there's still going to be the expectation of an annual inspection, if that inspector or that company were to go away for whatever reason, the next year, there would still need to be a new inspection by a licensed, qualified elevator inspector. And then from what was described to me by AFR and Director Varela, once those inspections are done, and when AFR goes to do building inspections on an annual basis, they look for that certification. And if it's not into compliance, then they issue the non-compliance notice, which made me sleep better understanding all of this. I don't know if that helps.
Then that answers my question, I think. So Councilor Bassan, what you're telling me is that AFR is still going to be responsible to a point. I mean, it will still, the building certification still has to be certified by a private company, but then recertified by the fire department. Is that correct?
Counselor, I'll let them speak to it, but my understanding is that a qualified elevator inspector will actually do the inspection at the cost to the private company owner. And then AFR, when they go and do their annual inspections, will ensure that elevator inspection is up to code.
Councilor Bassan, I see fire in the chat room. So can I get them?
I'm going to let them speak. Counselor, I just wanted to make sure to clarify my position on it first.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilor Borrego. So in terms of the things that have been discussed so far, when it comes to AFR's role in inspections of elevators, as you guys, Councilor Bassan, you were spot on. Basically, we're going to go out every year and do the annual building inspection, that's expected, but we'll ask and look for that permit that it's been certified by that third-party company. Once we determine that, as long as we see that permit, we're okay. Now, for some reason that permit's missing or it's not put in a conspicuous spot, we would work with the building owner, the business owner, to make sure that they get their that inspection done. So we could give them a notice of violation and basically set up a timeline for them to get that inspection or that certification done, right, within a given time period. And then one of our inspectors would basically make another visit out there to make sure they were compliant with that request.
So it sounds to me like essentially what we're doing is we're eliminating a government position for private inspection that would then go to AFR. Is that correct?
Director Varela, I don't know if you want to speak upon that. But,
I think there's only one inspector for elevators statewide, right? There's one inspector that works for the government. And so this is going to open up a new opportunity for private inspections to be done. That's what I'm getting to the crux of who is going to do the inspection. It's not going to be a government position. It's going to be a private sector position.
And Councilor Bassan, Councilor Borrego, that is correct. The elevator inspections will be conducted by private certified elevator specialists.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, so please remind me, Missy Knowles, did we vote on the amendment or is that what we're on?
That's what we're on right now, Counselor.
Okay, so if we can please vote on the amendment, please.
Counselor Borrego.
Yes.
Counselor Harris has been excused. Counselor Pena.
Yes.
Counselor Sena.
Yes.
Counselor Basan.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. So I would like to go back to 076 as amended. Counselors, do you have any questions or comments regarding the ordinance itself? All right, so the motion was with a do pass as amended. Missy Knowles.
Counselor Borrego.
I still have some questions, but I'll vote yes.
Counselor Pena.
Yes.
Counselor Sena.
You're muted, Counselor.
Yes.
And thank you. Counselor Basan.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you. I would like to make a motion for immediate action. Thank you, Counselor Sena. Missy Knowles.
Counselor Borrego.
No.
Counselor Harris is excused. Counselor Pena.
Yes.
Counselor Sena.
Yes.
Counselor Basan.
Yes.
That motion fails. It must be a unanimous vote for immediate action.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item F 077. I will move a deferral until December 13th for Counselor Davis. This is amending Article 20 of the Chapter 13 of the Revised Ordinances of Albuquerque, otherwise known as the Albuquerque Tax Preparer and Consumer Rights Ordinance regarding requirements for tax preparation and services. Thank you. Counselor Borrego with a second. And Missy Knowles.
Counselor Borrego.
Yes.
Counselor Pena.
Yes.
Counselor Sena.
Yes.
Counselor Basan.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you. We have already heard agenda item G earlier, and so we will move on to agenda item H, R192. Counselor Sena.
Thank you, Madam Chair. R192 is requiring the city of Albuquerque to enter into a project labor agreement with the construction partners performing the construction of a new multi-purpose soccer stadium upon the bond approval by New Mexico voters on the November 2021 ballot. I move deferral until December 13th.
Thank you, Counselor Borrego with a second. Any questions or comments, counselors? Missy Knowles.
Counselor Borrego.
Yes.
Counselor Pena.
Yes.
Counselor Sena.
Yes.
Counselor Basan.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you. And Counselor Sena for our last agenda item, item I, R210.
Thank you, Madam Chair. R210 is approving and authorizing the mayor to execute a one-time grant agreement with the New Mexico Early Childhood Education and Care Department Services in partnership with the Southwest Region Education Cooperative and providing an appropriation to the Department of Family and Community Services Division of Child and Family Development for fiscal year 2022. I move a do pass.
Thank you, Counselor Sena. I see Counselor Pena, I think, with a second. Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments, counselors? And Missy Knowles.
Counselor Borrego.
Yes.
Counselor Pena.
Yes.
Thank you. Counselor Sena.
Yes.
Counselor Basan.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. Thank you, counselors, and to everyone attending tonight's meeting. There being no further business, this FGO meeting is adjourned. Have a good night and happy Thanksgiving.